Welcome to the Planning for Life podcast with certified financial planner professional Russell Jacobs and financial life advisor Carl Coolidge. Carl and Russell will share creative strategies and ideas for overcoming challenges in your personal and financial life. Inevitably, life happens, and we will empower you to reach your destination. Thanks for joining us. Now, on to the show.
Hello and welcome to another Planning for Life podcast. Today, Carl and I are going to talk about high-earning executives. People don't really truly understand when you get to different levels within the world of business, things get really complicated, and having a planner in your corner can make a huge difference. And that's what Carl and I are going to dive into today. So, Carl, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. Great to be here.
Well, I'm always happy to have you on the show, man. So I think one of the big things that I've heard is that executives are terrified of taxes. Now, I want to preface everybody right out of the gate that Carl is not an accountant, nor is he a CPA. He's also not providing any sort of accounting advice or tax advice, but we're going to talk about this from a financial planning standpoint because financial planning is what the firm does. So, Carl, what do you do and how do you even begin the conversation surrounding taxes?
I think, as most of my comments seem to come across in these podcasts, is that we are focused on planning, as you said, financial planning, and really trying to understand what the client wants to accomplish, because then that lays the groundwork for how they work with their accountant or CPA to figure out the tax side of the coin. So what I mean by that is, as you said, as they get more income, they have deferred compensation, they have 401k, they have other avenues where they're maybe getting stock option things along those lines. And so looking at that and how it fits into your total financial plan is the key before you really go to your accountant and say, okay, how's this tax impact going to be? It really works hand in hand, but that's how we're looking at it, is really developing a plan to say, what exactly are you trying to accomplish? Because if we don't know, then it's just a smorgasbord of money, if you will, and you got to have some direction with it.
One of the other things that seems to confuse people are the stock options, what to do with those and how those fit into a long-term financial plan. Carl, I think you and I talked, or maybe it was actually Russell, early on in our podcasting career together, that some people might have very, very heavily concentrated positions within an organization, which sometimes happens with stock options. So let's talk about those. One, what do they do while they're earning stock options? And then two, what happens when they get close to retirement?
Well, stock options are tricky and can have a lot of different scenarios and attachments to them. But in a basic sense, you're getting stock shares of your company at a certain price that they offer those. And then you've heard people say if options are underwater or above water, that just means that the value is higher than what they gave you the option at from your company. And so some of them have where you can exercise those immediately. Some most typically have vesting schedules of some sort where you have to be with the company for X amount of time, and then you'll get the stock options that will be available to you. But it's really looking at trying to understand, if you exercise, how does this impact you? So the problem with it is most executives say, well, I don't want to exercise it if it's above water because I have to pay tax on it. But I don't want to exercise it if it's below water because I'm taking a loss. So we have to educate them and say, hey, you got to have one or the other. And a lot of that comes through the planning to say, okay, are there certain targets we need or deal with each year where maybe it does make sense to take a loss on it, or it does make sense to have that capital gain tax that they may have to pay. So again, working in coordination with their tax advisor, that's where it can make a lot of sense. But options are, a big part in some cases of those executives' retirement. So it's really key. I mean, you hear the big names where, they make it sound good, like Apple, where Tim Cook makes like $1 million, but they don't mention he got $400 million in stock options this year. So, for people like that, and I know not everybody's on that same level, it's a very fluid situation on how you exercise those and make it most beneficial to your situation.
What about profit sharing? So let's look at from a And you deal with this, right? Because as a business owner, you take distributions based off of profit also. And that is taxed differently in general than ordinary income. So if an employee, maybe that's part of their compensation package, is getting quarterly profit sharing, what does that do to the plan?
So with the profit sharing, I would kin that to say quarterly bonus. We have a lot of physicians that get quarterly bonus based on production. And so we plan around that. So a lot of times instead of, most of us operate on monthly or annual expenses or budgets, we'll work with them a lot of times and say, okay, you get this quarterly bonus. We can do projections based on that. And then we determine, well, you need to fund X, Y, and Z or whatever your goals are to accomplish. And so we run it out of that calculation. So we're able to adjust, which makes more sense to them because they can live on their base income or that's what is their normal monthly expenses. But then when we have these quarterly bonuses, we're able to say, okay, now we can attack some of the things that you wanted to accomplish. And that's really, to me, similar to what you're saying with profit sharing, where you would get different distributions, bonus, profit sharing, because the profit sharing you're referencing is different than, say, profit sharing in a retirement plan, which is kind of a different animal. So,
Right. And I love your point of clarification there. I want to make sure I highlight this for the listeners is from a planning perspective, that profit sharing is actually part of the plan, but the goal is for you to live off your ordinary monthly, biweekly income. And the profit sharing is the kind of the icing on the cake. Did I summarize that okay?
again, if you're getting it, again, I would cross over and say profit sharing bonus payments are probably how I would label those because you're correct. Some people depend on them to live, which you probably shouldn't unless it's a huge part of your compensation. But to your point, if you can live on the base income and then use these quarterly bonuses as a means to fund the things you need to, then it usually works out better. Whereas the other profit sharing is you work for a company, they're profitable, even if you are in an executive role, and they say, okay, in addition to your 401k deferrals, in addition to any matching we may do, we're going to add a profit sharing contribution on your behalf that will go into your retirement plan. So it's deferred money that you can access until retirement. So that's completely different than this other profit sharing bonus type structure.
Carl, I was just thinking about Christmas Vacation. The what happened with his bonus. I don't want that to happen with any of our listeners. And if you haven't
Right.
watched that, it should be on your Christmas movie list. All right. Something else that I don't think is talked about enough, especially in this form, podcasting form, in a media perspective, is disability, right? You being able to ensure your ability to earn money is really, really important, especially as you earn. But a lot of people say, oh, Carl, I've already got that as part of my package, my benefits package. But there are some finer points to you not owning that disability policy. Would you mind diving into that a little bit?
Absolutely. Again, there's a couple of different scenarios to look at with disability, but what you're referring to is most employees, executives of companies have a group disability plan where they will receive typically anywhere from 50, sometimes as high as 70% of their pre-tax income. Generally speaking, what happens though is that benefit, if they became disabled, is taxable, depending again on how the structure of the plan is set up. So you have to look at that. It works more similar to your paycheck, but right off the bat, you're taking anywhere from a 50 to 30% pay cut because of you're not making 100% of your pay. And if it's still taxable, it's really just that income loss. So certain plans will have it structured where they have the executives pay it or pay the benefit. Again, I don't want to get it too deeply into the tax side, but where that benefit could be tax free. So if they became disabled. So that's one side of it. But a lot of times what we see is group doesn't cover what it really needs to cover from an individual disability standpoint. So then you begin to look at can you layer or add on top of that some individual disability coverage so it closes that gap if they have that need if they became disabled? And it, again, disability is a tricky one. A lot of us never think that'll happen. As I say, it just depends on the level of disability that you receive or what type of job you have. Obviously, physicians are very concerned about disability because if you're a surgeon and you lose your hand, you can't exactly do what you were doing before. Whereas an executive, depending on the style, there may be certain things that could happen that you could still evolve with it. So, but the analogy I heard early on in the business was if there was a money machine in your garage, you probably heard this from Matt, how much would you pay to insure it? And people say, well, it depends on how much money it produced. And let's say it produced $100,000. Well, you probably spend close to 100,000 to insure it if it was a guarantee it was coming. And so people never view their income like that because I guess you don't want to be known as an income machine, even though that would sound pretty cool. But that's how you've got to look at it, is to say, hey, I produce X income through my company. I have certain group benefits typically, but maybe there's a gap I need to close on top of that.
What about spending too much? I hear this often that as your income increases, your lifestyle increases. You address that a lot in planning, and we've talked about that before, but would you mind reminding the audience your guys' position on that?
Of course, we look at it as really lifestyle drift is kind of the term we use. And so we see it obviously constantly, which the more money you make, the more free you tend to be with dollars. You don't stress about going out to dinner. You don't stress about taking that trip. You don't stress about spending a little more money on Amazon this month. So lifestyle drift is something to be very concerned about. And what we try to really get people to focus on, because keep in mind, and I know we've talked about this in other podcasts, it doesn't mean it's just for those making what would be considered smaller incomes. It's those making very, very large incomes. The problem is still the same. The dollars are just larger. And so what we really look at is to say, as you are able to pay down bills or debts or liabilities, or as you're spending on something and that stops, then let's reroute it to something meaningful. Let's just not let it drift and be spent on whatever it may be spent on. So, an example of that would be you have a child maybe for elementary school that have in a private school, and let's say tuition's $15,000 a year, and then you decide by the time they hit middle or high school that it makes sense and they no longer need to go there. Well, instead of letting that 15 grand come back into the spendable budget, then you say, okay, here's 15 I was used to spending. Let's now put it towards savings or put it towards investments or whatever it may be. Because if you don't, it will get spent. It's just the nature of how we all operate. And it won't show up savings unless you make a concerted effort to make sure that happens.
Life insurance. To kind of wrap up today's podcast, again, it's part of a lot of packages, benefit packages of executives, including physicians. But a lot of times it's just term, right? It's the renter type life insurance. I mean, as you continue to earn more money, and let's say you had that $15,000 from private school, depending on the plan specifically, is life insurance a viable option for high earning executives to make sure that they have the protection they need?
Absolutely. In a group setting, you will get certain benefits and you'll get group terms. Sometimes you'll even get group universal life in some cases. But with a lot of these coverages, they're not what we call portable. So when you leave the company, sometimes, and again, it depends, you're not able to take that coverage with you. So where you end up is you had good coverage while you were working, but if you're no longer working there, you switch jobs, you retire, you may not have that coverage. So it's important to look at the details on that insurance and see, is it portable? Is it something that can build cash value? Is it age banded where as you go over time, you're getting increasing premiums? So the other thing too, and why we look at permanent life insurance again, where it's a fit for those, is at a certain level, once you make certain incomes, you can only put so many dollars away. Again, if you're getting stock options and some other tools, that's separate. But once you max out your 401k, typically you're making enough income where you can't do a deductible IRA or Roth. There's not a lot of other places to get tax deferred money that can be beneficial to you. So again, when it's done in an appropriate manner, life insurance can be a very strong component to give you the protection you need on a permanent basis, but also supplement retirement income. And it takes funding and it takes time, but if you commit to those things as part of your overall plan, it can be very impactful. So, this is a lot of what we do. We're looking into all of these benefits, saying, because you just know if you're executive, yeah, I've got coverage at work. Well, like I mentioned, is it term? Is it group universal? Is it portable? Is it age pay? We're looking at all those things because we want to determine, is this going to meet what you need long term? And if it doesn't, then the sooner we can address it, the better. Because the only negative, if you will, about insurance is it doesn't get less expensive as you get older. So you want to deal with it while you're young and typically healthier.
What did I miss? What sort of other questions should I have asked you pertaining to executives, physicians, people who get different sorts of compensation that you think our audience should hear?
Well, I think we covered good points. I think the key is, and again, I feel like a broken record, but going back to have a plan, because all of these benefits are great, and especially when you're a high income earner, but typically your expenses are higher, your commitments are higher, you're asked to get involved in more things. You may do business deals with different friends and associates, and all of that costs money. And so you need to make sure that you have your plan in good order. And a lot of times when I talk to clients, I'm looking at planning saying, okay, here's your plan, here's what we need to accomplish. If we're doing all those core things that we need to be doing, you have your life, you have your disability, you have long-term care, you have your savings, you have your retirement, then I'm not going to say I don't care what you do with the rest of the money, but that gives you a lot more freedom to say, hey, we're meeting all these core things that we need to accomplish. So then that gives you flexibility to say, yeah, I want the second home, or yeah, I want the boat, or yeah, I want to take, a month vacation, because you have that core doing what you're supposed to be doing. And I think that's the overall key, is just make sure in your plan that you're sticking to what you need to do. It's like a lot of people dieting, they always say have a cheat day, right? So you stay sane and you can handle it. And it's not that different. This is just more of a long-term play to say, hey, stick with your core and you'll be good most of the time, but have that cheat day where you can, stay sane and live a little bit. So that's what I would say, is just continue to have that plan.
Well, we absolutely want to make sure that all of our listeners are not only staying sane, but sticking with the plan, right? Because life does happen. Life gets in the way. Life throws us a lot of louies. And having a good plan in place can make a world of difference. Carl, thank you so much for your thought leadership today as we broke down really, some of the biggest concerns that high-earning executives and physicians actually have with their financial plan.
Thank you, Matt. Always great to be here, and hope it was good information for the listeners.
We really appreciate it. All right. Well, make sure that you subscribe on YouTube to the podcast. That way, every time they come out with a new podcast, will show up. But if you know somebody who really, truly needs to hear this, if you know an executive or a physician who has just talked openly about her earning and some of the hurdles that they faced, make sure that you refer them to Jacobs Coolidge Company. Give Russell or Carl a call, and they will make sure that they set a good meeting and give them some great advice. So for everybody at Jacobs Coolidge Company, this is Matt Halloran, and we'll see you on the other side of the mic very soon.
The content is developed from sources believed to be providing accurate information. The information in this material is not intended as tax or legal advice. Please consult legal or tax professionals for specific information regarding your individual situation. The opinions expressed and material provided are for general information and should not be considered a solicitation for the purchase or sale of any security. Russell C. Jacobs III, Carl B. Coolidge, James Jacobs, and William Schwartz are registered representatives of and offer securities, investment advisory, and financial planning services through MML Investor Services, LLC, member SIPC, Supervisory Office, Jacksonville, Florida. Jacobs Coolidge & Company, LLC is not a subsidiary or affiliate of MML Investor Services, LLC, or its affiliated companies.